Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. Maybe do we give a few minutes for people to join, or do we just start straight out? Okay. I'm not entirely sure if we should wait or not, but maybe should we give them a minute, Janice?
Yeah, we can give them a minute or two. How are you?
Brilliant. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we can just give a few minutes. Okay, Ines says we can just start. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So this morning we are here with Janice Jackson, and it is a pleasure to be interviewing you today in the framework of this movement of Latin Americans for education, in the framework of this movement for reading comprehension. Janice is joining us from the Aspen Institute. She is Executive Director of Education and Society Programs, and she's also the ex-CEO of Chicago Public Schools. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Janice. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I would like to start to give you a bit of context on myself. I have been working in education for a while, but I'm based in Chile. So my perspective is the region. And of course, we're very curious to hear your thoughts on your experience, for you to hear your insights and some of the learnings you've had and how we might apply them to Latin America. So to start with, it would be great if you could maybe give us some insights as to maybe the context as to where your work has been carried out mostly, and things that would enlighten us to be able to identify common threads with Latin America, so that we can build in and go deeper with the specific projects you've been leading.
All right, sounds good. Well, I will start with the present. As you acknowledged, I am the Executive Director of Ed and Society at the Aspen Institute. And later in our discussion, I'd love to kind of walk you through how we're trying to determine a more global vision for education in the United States. So that's really my charge there, and really excited about some of the programming that we're putting into place. But also, I started my career as an educator, as a high school teacher here in Chicago, and worked my way up through all of those roles as a high school teacher, as the principal of two schools that we founded and started from scratch, all the way up to senior leadership, where I served as both the chief education officer and the chief executive officer for a period of about 8 years. And during that time, both as a principal and in senior leadership roles, did a fair amount to lead a lot of the academic improvements that CPS experienced. And one of the unique things that I bring to this conversation is that I served in the district, but I'm also a parent of CPS students at the time, and I also was a student in CPS. So I can definitely say over the past 40 years, I have observed the changes that took place and can speak to what the student experience has been over time, and also what role educators and policymakers played in helping us to set a new path forward.
Fantastic. Thank you for that very brilliant introduction, because I think for me, the most important thing is talking to real implementers, but also you have also lived through the whole system, right?
Yeah.
So as an ex-alum, and the trajectory you've had is very unique. It gives us a lot of insight as to both being a user, as well as you being focused on being a practitioner through being a principal, a high school teacher. You know the ins and the outs of the system in a way that very few people, I think, that do. So it's really fantastic to hear you today. In that sense, would you mind maybe running us through, I think, to give everyone sort of context on your work at CPS and today at the Aspen Institute, maybe an overall of what the current context is. Obviously, Chicago, so I think people know have different levels of information about it. So it would be interesting if you could sort of level the playing field around maybe some of the statistics around the education system there, and sort of some of the overview that you would think is relevant to then dig deep.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say to folks is that we engaged in a decades-long reform effort that really started in the late 1980s and still runs through today. I think that's important for people to know, because whenever you're trying to make substantial change in a city, country, et cetera, knowing that it takes time is an important factor. It started, I would say, back in the late 80s and 90s when then Secretary of Education Bill Bennett for the United States visited Chicago and remarked that it was one of the worst school districts in the country. As you can imagine, that was a huge embarrassment for the city. But if you know anything about Chicago, it lit a fire, and I would say it created 40 years of continuous improvement. As I stated, I was a student then at that time, and I know what it was like to be a student in the district, and really the two-tiered system that we had, which is, very few students had access to college preparatory courses and were on a college prep track. That changed over time. For example, we improved our graduation rates dramatically. When we embarked on this reform, about half of the students would graduate in 4 years, half of our senior class. When I left CPS, that number was at 84%. And again, we didn't push a magic button and go from 50% of students graduating to 84. It was a result of sustained continuous improvement over time. And I'll talk a little bit about what gets you this type of improvement in a second, but let me just go through the numbers. Another thing that's impressive about CPS is that CPS was recognized as the fastest growing school district in the country, large urban school district in the country. We were at the 96th percentile for all school systems. So large, small, urban, rural, low income, high income. When the professors at Stanford actually did this analysis, they weren't commissioned by CPS. They were doing an analysis of student growth. CPS stood out as an outlier. And of course, people wanted to know what is happening there. I would say a few things happened. Number one, a strong commitment to college as the North Star, meaning we wanted to prepare students to go to college and be successful. Whether that was their goal or not, we would set them up and make sure they had all of the tools to be successful. A strong focus on literacy as well as data-driven decision-making. I have had a chance to, visit districts and work with districts across the country, and I continue to remark at how CPS is such a strong data-driven district. And then the last thing I'll say from a more strategic standpoint is the focus on leadership. CPS is a large district. We have about 350,000 students, 40,000 teachers and staff. You can't hire 25 or 30,000 teachers, but you can focus on 665 principals, making sure they themselves create strong schools, hire the right educators, and have a strong improvement plan to drive improvements in the district. So that was really the strategy that we implemented, like I said, over the course of 2 decades for sure. And as a result, we saw higher graduation rates, higher college enrollment and completion rates, as well as improved literacy and numeracy rates.
Fantastic. Thank you. Very impressive. I mean, to have lived through this in a short period of time, as you said, I think the most important thing is that change does take time. And I think having a clear roadmap for what you want to achieve in decades, not just years, is a huge difference. I think, as you just stated, 40 years, 4 decades is sufficient time to actually see changes, and you see it through generations, right? So congratulations, absolutely. I think, on that point. Oh, of course. And so to follow up on what you just said, you said part of the strategies was to focus on 665 principles, which actually makes sense because it's a manageable number, right? So what exactly was the work that you did with them, and what were the strategies that you then aligned them all to work upon?
Let me start with the framework that we operate in CPS, because I think that's important. And for those listening in, if they want to read more about this, I would point them to Anthony Brike's work. Tony Brike, who is a professor at University of Chicago, he wrote about the various reform era. So I point them to that. But in Chicago, it is very common for the district as well as the civic and the post-secondary community to work collaboratively on student achievement. So we are blessed that the school system is not left to figure things out and left to their own devices, but instead you have this ecosystem of all of these entities that exist within a city or municipality working together towards this common goal. Excuse me. Sorry about
Bless
that.
you.
So I bring that up because when you think about thank you, when you think about our work with principals, you will see all those factors come into play. So number one, at the beginning of the 2000s, CPS decided that we needed to focus on principal leadership. The first thing that we did is created a more stringent process to become a principal in a district that went beyond what the state said needed to happen. So principals not only had to pass the state test to get that license, but they also had to pass and demonstrate certain competencies to be a principal in CPS. So that's number one. We made it more difficult and we wanted highly skilled people in that role. We also partnered with an organization called the Chicago Public Education Fund, which is a separate nonprofit entity that raises money to support the capacity building of leaders. So they helped us do a few things. They helped us on how to recruit the best leaders, how to give them professional development while they're in the role. And then the last piece, which I think is critically important, is how do you keep your best leaders in the right place? This is an area where I see a lot of districts or entities struggle. You know, they focus on filling the gaps and principal retention, which is critically important initially. But you also have to remember that your high performers are working under incredibly stringent conditions, and that you have to provide them with professional development so that they can continue to grow and develop. The other thing that we did in conjunction with the Public Education Fund is set up strong data systems. So we could look school by school and see how a principal was doing. We could see how parents rated them on their surveys, how that connected to test scores. And so there's a very complex system to look at performance. And if you work in a district, you understand that that's part of how your performance is measured by different entities. I would say the selection process, working directly with universities to make sure their curriculum was preparing these leaders to lead in our district, was critically important. Partnered with local universities like University of Illinois at Chicago, Loyola, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, to name a few, to make sure that their curriculum was aligned to train people to come and work in our systems. That work has happened for over 20 years. I think the organization was founded in the early 2000s, so they are celebrating like 25 years. And once again, it just shows the interconnectivity of people coming together to do this work, but also how it is sustained over a period of time to get these types of outcomes. The last thing I will say, if you've heard anything about Chicago, you know, we have some tough circumstances. And one of the factors that people don't understand or fully appreciate is our principal retention. Prior to us doing this work, only about 75% of our principals were retained year over year. That meant each year we were replacing 25% of our teachers. In Chicago, that's over 100 people, if you can imagine that. When we put these systems in place, made the conditions better for principals, gave them better training, better pay, etc., we moved that number to over 91%. So that tells you something. When you can attract highly qualified people and actually keep them, it gives you an indication that the system is working for them.
Of course. And it allows you to work on the long-term goal, which means you have people in place who know how to make the decisions, right? And have been there.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And the
Thank
other
you for
thing
the
I'll
overview.
say, one extra thing I'll add too, is that CPS has experienced a lot of turnover at the top in the leadership position, in the CEO position, you know, from 2000, since Arnie Duncan left in 2008, there were like 10 or 11 CEOs. That's a lot of churn. We would not have been able to see that improvement if we didn't have stability at the local level. So I think for people who are working in places with, big political challenges where leadership changes a lot, really investing in that local leadership and sustainability around that local leadership is a game changer.
100% it is. I completely align with that. And the importance of having a principal also who understands his team and works that way, and having the support structure, as you mentioned, is very, very important. So bringing it towards the work that this organization is moving around literacy, what were the specific challenges or the priorities you set out in this restructuring of the school system? And where does literacy come into play, and sort of how did you manage that?
Yeah. Well, it's literacy, as you know, is involved in everything. So I'll talk about a few different initiatives. The first thing
Yeah.
was our focus on early childhood education. That was critical. So in Illinois, it is mandatory that students attend school at the age of 5, or right after, kindergarten. So we have full day kindergarten. In the past, some students will come to kindergarten reading or beginning readers. In a lot of cases, they did not, especially if they did not have any formal schooling. So a big part of our strategy was to get students into school earlier and also keep them into school longer when we talk about post-secondary. But at the front end, really getting them into pre-K 3, which is for 3-year-olds, and pre-K 4. So we embarked on a pre-K for all initiative, and we did that by prioritizing students in low-income communities first, but it eventually expanded to everybody. We wanted to make sure all of the preschoolers in Chicago had access to pre-K programming with quality certified teachers by the age of 3. This allowed us to begin teaching them early literacy skills. We saw more beginning readers and readers by 5th grade as a result. And it allowed for us to account for some of the socioeconomic differences that show up for students who come from low income backgrounds who don't get formal schooling compared to their peers who did get formal schooling earlier and would come into kindergarten ready to read. So that was number one. The other thing was a strong literacy program for all students. And that included lots of interventions to support kids. We would test our students, see how they were performing. We did a lot of small group instruction to intervene when students needed help. We also have a strong emphasis on bilingual education in Chicago. In fact, the University of Chicago did a study, which I'm happy to share with you, and you can share with participants after this, that actually showed that the students who were in our bilingual program actually outperformed their peers who weren't in the bilingual program because they were getting dual support so that they can both learn and enhance their literacy in their home language, but also learning English so that they can access the tests that they have to take for high school and college here in the United States. And so I would say that strong focus and that comprehensive focus on literacy is something that you see throughout schooling in Chicago. At the high school level, I will say this is probably where it's the most challenging. So folks on this call know that the way that high schools are organized, it's very content specific. I was a former high school principal. I can tell you how hard it is to get high school teachers to teach literacy, yet that was the charge. So we wanted them to teach students how to read, but also to read the content as well. You need to be able to do both, because if students' literacy skills aren't strong enough, they won't be able to access the content fully. And so that was the messaging that we gave to our high schoolers. And we implemented a variety of things. Some things worked, some things didn't. We would do like double periods of English, which is ELA, English Language Arts class, which is like our reading class in high school. We would have double periods of that so that students would get more time, sometimes double periods of reading, sometimes double periods of math, depending on what skill set they had. We also did a fair amount of interim assessments so that we could constantly see if students were developing stronger literacy skills. And then I would also say this is something that we implemented in the district. I can't say it happened universally because it was difficult, but it did happen in a lot of schools. We focused on writing as well, which I think a lot of times when people are implementing strong literacy programs at whatever level, writing is almost like an afterthought or something at the end, where we know that writing is actually the highest form of literacy. And so I think for any program that is focused on this, I would just remind people to implement writing, authentic writing, more and more, especially today where our kids don't spend a lot of time generating original material. It's just very different with all the technology. So the more you can create an environment where kids are generating authentic material from their own brains and writing, doing that tactile piece, I think that's critically important. And so I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that in today's discussion.
100%. Thank you. I will definitely come back to AI and the role of technology in literacy, but I would like to to dig a little deeper in what you just mentioned, especially focusing on early childhood literacy, as you mentioned, the program you have done there, whereby you have a strategy coming in early and this remedial, almost sounds like almost remedial work, right, that you're doing at the beginning. Can you walk us through that in a bit more detail? How do you get parents to buy into it? How do you get the structure to the like institutions to give you, probably open up the school earlier? What are the challenges around sort of the actual implementation of this? So how do you navigate some of the nitty gritty, and what were the sort of the key drivers for success, but also some of the key challenges you faced?
Yeah, good question. I would say, let me start with the enabling factors. There were a few things that enabled us to do this work that I think are critically important. Number one, a stake in the ground from both the city as well as the state around literacy. So even today, if you go and look at reports like the state we're in for Illinois, we track student literacy as early as pre-K. We take an assessment called the KIDS assessment, KIDS, and it basically assesses literacy skills in the early grades. And as you can imagine, we look at things like how familiar are they with text, letter recognition, all the basic literacy skills. And I would even say, I don't consider it remediation at that early age. It's really introduction and exploration, right? It's really the things that all students should be doing. But unfortunately, sometimes in a lot of families, they wait for kids to go to school and somebody to teach them how to read. So we just try to get them to school sooner and to enable that process sooner. I think the other thing that is an enabler is that data is public. So I remember when we were implementing that as a district leader, I felt a lot of pressure to make sure we implemented the test with fidelity, meaning all of the students who were eligible took the test, unless there was a circumstance that prevented them from doing it. And then we were also very serious about the reporting, looking at it by school, looking at it by trends, whether that be how our local income students doing compared to their students with more resources, how are Black students doing compared to their Latino counterparts or white counterparts. So we were very serious about unpacking that. I would also say engaging the parents. This is a place where it was a big part of our initiative with mixed results. The number one thing we focused on first was getting parents to enroll their kids in school and bringing them to school. I would say that took up majority of the time, and anybody who's implementing this knows. Now, it may be different in different contexts where if you offer something like this, people show up, they're so excited. But we had to do a fair amount of work. And that, again, is where the community came together. So we had other people, community-based organizations, not just the school, helping us to get to parents and saying, no, this is good for your kids. Even if it's a half day, this is the advantage that your child will get as a result. So bringing parents along. We also had, in not every case, but in some cases, programming, once again, with a university partner, University of Chicago, to work with parents on how to help their kids learn to read. So there's an initiative out of University of Chicago. I cannot remember the professor's name, but it's like the 30 million words initiative or something like that, which basically teaches you that if students are exposed to language earlier. And so we wanted to make sure that students, especially from low-income backgrounds, had that type of exposure, because we know if they're exposed to words early on, it makes it easier to teach them and develop those strong literacy skills. So there was a lot that happened there. We also utilized, and you're going to talk about this later, we did utilize a fair amount of ed tech tools and testing early on to test our students. Dynamic reporting. We invested early in NWEA, which was a tool we used back then to look at how students were performing, give teachers reports right away so they could do grouping of their students, so they could target discrete reading skills that they needed to focus on. And I think that was a good approach. I will say that there was a period where, and I know this has been covered, where we were focused on whole language and people were kind of stepping back from the science of reading. I'm happy to say in CPS, We never fully stepped away from the science of reading, which thank God we didn't. There was always a focus on phonemic awareness. We would use tools early on to make sure students were getting those skills. So I think that serendip, I mean, I don't know the right term, but it's good for us that we didn't move away from that science of reading. And I would say now CPS has doubled down on the science of reading to really help students catch up.
There's just so many things I want to ask you about, but I'm having to prioritize. I'm wondering, at a certain point, did you pilot things first to start with? Did you start small and then scale, or did you go to scale immediately? Because I'm thinking, so my question is going towards the point of how do you get these things to scale, right? You talked about working with the principal level, which obviously takes you to a scale quite rapidly, given the number of students, the number of teachers you have in the system. Yeah. But what other elements were important to get these things to scale? And maybe that's my first question. Then as a second part, I guess we could talk about policy and the role of the state.
Mm-hmm. I would actually say, first of all, it's a great question. And in many cases, we would pilot things either intentionally, knowing that, and by pilot in CPS, if you got 600 schools or 150 high schools, pilot might be 25 or 50 high schools, which really isn't a pilot in a lot of other places. It's a lot of kids. But we look for research-based proven practices. And I will say part of our leadership, and people have to determine whether or not they're comfortable with this, but a big part of our leadership was large scale change, meaning we would come up with a strategy. We would come up with a plan to implement it district wide. We provide the resources, the support in order to help people buy into it. But a lot of this was policy driven, meaning, here are the outcomes that we're going to be focused on. And here's the professional development and training and strategy to do it. Now, we did give our principals a lot of autonomy, I should say, to say, listen, if you have another way that you want to get there, we'll give you the autonomy to do that. But the outcomes and the deliverables did not change. And so, say it a different way, when I was a principal, I would tell my team, here are the outcomes we need to meet according to our strategic plan. I don't care if you stand on your head to get this done, but this is what I expect at the end. And I think when you have those high expectations and you give people support, most people go along with the program. But what I have seen many districts struggle with is they may make these big pronouncements or say where everybody needs to do X, Y, Z, but they haven't really put the systems and structures in place for people to do it with fidelity and to do it successfully. So we would always do a few things. One, we'd have the policy solution connected to it. We would leverage as much as possible technology. That is something that I find uniquely special about CPS. We've embraced technology early on. It's still a struggle, don't get me wrong, but we embraced it early on. And this notion of data-driven decision-making, again, like people will know how your kids are performing. There will be discussions, whether that's through the networks that you're in or district-wide data. So I think those systems around accountability and support are what are crucial in order to move this work along.
I couldn't be more in alignment. You've emphasized fidelity of implementation a few times because that's something that we've worked in a lot. I kind of wanted to double click on that again and ask you, what do you find? What do you find the hardest in terms of getting people to value fidelity of implementation? Because it's not a given, I think, when an institution is aligned around that. So how do you get people to align around the importance of implementing well according to plan?
Yeah, well, that's always the challenge. I think that's the biggest challenge in any organization, especially a large organization like CPS. I think the solutions, and they're not perfect, they're imperfect, and they require a lot of work, are pretty much the same, whether you're in a large district or a school system with 5 schools or lower, which is you have to start with a clear vision. And you have to start with the systems and structure and the organization to pull off what you're asking people to do. So if you want to implement a new math program, for example, and improve math scores by 20%. I'm just making this up. You can't just make an announcement and tell people to go figure it out on their own. You have to give them the playbook. You have to give them the resources, the tools in order to do it. You also must have a strong data and monitoring system. This is, again, a place where I see a lot of people fall short. How do you know people are doing it? It needs to be, you need to leverage technology as much as possible so that you can always tell what's happening in real time, or as much as you can, or as close to real time as possible. And you have to have a system for intervention when people aren't implementing with fidelity. And I think the last piece is communication, constantly communicating the why, and then showing examples of where it works. So like we would do a fair amount of like, people in networks, meaning these are schools that are geographically proximate to each other. So we're going to all sit down with the 25 high schools in this region and let's look at performance. And we're going to lift up school A and B, who is using the district strategy, and let's look at their performance versus school C and D that has decided to do something different. And I think that kind of leadership is what it takes to move things forward. I also want to acknowledge that that is difficult leadership for some people because they're not accustomed to making the work public, to having that kind of public accountability. But if we're serious about moving student data and student improvement, you have to be hold adults accountable for their results. And that's something that we have done in Chicago. It hasn't been perfect. We fight with the union all the time because of that, but it is a staple of how we lead because that is the only way you can make improvement, in my opinion.
I am very aligned on that. Thank you. I think it's incredible to think of the scale at which you were able to deploy so quickly, and I think you're right in highlighting or being very emphatic around the tools and sort of how technology has actually allowed you to do so. And I think accountability is one of the important factors to also get parents involved and also be sort of everyone aligned on the system. So do you mind now digging in a little deeper into sort of the technology in general? I guess, well, over time it's changed, but specifically today and in the current context with the challenges we have around AI coming up and how it's changing, how do you see this affecting what you've already built, and how do you see it enabling some things going forward, and what are sort of the precautions or the liabilities you see in deploying technology today, given how it's changed over the last few years?
Yeah, it has changed a lot. Well, I'll say a couple things. One, the work that we're doing at the Aspen Institute, we're actually forming a rising generation strategy group where we are bringing together leaders from corporate, civic, education, all of these different industries to talk about the future of education in the USA. And AI and ed tech is one of the 4 areas that we are focused on because it is so critically important. So the first question we're trying to unpack is whether or not AI will be the disruptor to education that we have been told it will be. And the short answer is, I believe so. I think we're already seeing that. But I also think that we know a whole lot more about AI than we give ourselves credit for. And I think that there are a lot of things we can be doing to better prepare students to take on this new challenge. And so that's the work that our group is going to do. We're going to be looking for use cases, we're going to be looking for use cases both in the classroom, but also district-wide, that would allow us to unlock a few things that we haven't thought about. So I'll start with the positive things. Number one, could districts run more efficiently using different AI tools, the same way businesses are looking at different tools? I think the value there is that it unlocks dollars that can be used in the classroom to hire more teachers or more interventionists or more tools that are needed to advance learning. So I think that educators and districts should be paying a lot of attention to that. But also, what are the use cases in classrooms that help students use AI effectively? One of the biggest concerns I have, and I remember when, ChatGPT was first introduced, I hadn't heard of it. I was at a tech conference, and this was early in the process. Bill Gates was speaking about it, and I was like, wow, why don't I know about it? Well, it had just come out. Went back home and went to my kids' school, maybe a couple of months later, they had organized a whole, parent event around how to use AI effectively. They had brought the seniors in to help them unpack the AI policies at the universities they would be going to. I mean, just embracing it. And then I was looking at some districts where their first inclination was to ban it. You can't ban it or you can't block it. You have to embrace it, and you have to start creating, knowing that students have this tool now. What is it that you're trying to, how will we get them to demonstrate learning? We have to think about that in new and different ways. And I think that the field of education has to pay attention to that. And it's like any other transformation that happens. I remember when the internet first came out, and I was a student, I had teachers who said, you can't use the internet for articles, which was silly. You still had to go and use microfiche, the old system. It's like, I am not, the skill that I am demonstrating is not my ability to understand what's in the article. I am demonstrating the ability to go and locate something on microfilm. That is not a skill that's going to help me in the world of work. And so I would encourage educators to think about, when we put these tools in front of kids, or we prevent them from using the tools, quite frankly, what is it that we're trying to protect? What skills do we want them to demonstrate, and what is the best way to get them to demonstrate it? The last thing I'll say on AI is that a lot is being made about AI taking over jobs, and there will be some shifts in the job market as a result of this technology, as there always is when there's a technological change this big. But I don't believe that we should be scaring young people into thinking that AI is going to take jobs. I do think you're going to have a harder time getting a job if you're not able to use AI effectively. And so that's what schools should, in my opinion, be focused on. Like, whatever skills or resources or tools are out there in the field, how do we make sure the students that are in our care graduate with the facility to use those tools? And so that's my message to educators around AI. There's so much more to unpack there around policies and things like that, but I think it's something worth embracing. Yeah.
So just one more thing I would like to double click on is, how do you see teachers taking it on as well? Because we talk a lot about how students will learn to use it and be measured. How do we go about teachers? Because it's also a challenge for a lot of people who were educated before, and it's not necessarily as comfortable. It's a challenge, right? Because teachers are now sometimes could know less than a common student given technology. So how do you see that, and how have you been working around that issue in different schools?
The thing that I'm not working directly in schools, but this is what I would say if I were leading a high school now or a school system, which is, like I said, to embrace it. I think we have to go back and train our teachers to use like the flipped classroom model even more effectively now, because we used to spend a lot of time in school with students discovering information and like coming to it. So you read a book or you research an article. Now that can be done quickly. So we need to be spending more time on the analysis and synthesis of all of this information and applying it to a new setting, which those who understand the full cycle of learning know that is the highest level of learning, right? When you can actually take the information you have and apply it in a new and novel setting. That is a different way of teaching than the way we've organized units and classroom discussions. And so the biggest change, I think, is thinking about what are the deliverables or the things we're asking students to do. We know that if you want them to do a research paper on the Revolutionary War, AI can write that for them in 25 seconds. But could they come to school and somehow demonstrate that and act it out using their own words and their own, ways of communicating that? Could we do more project-based learning where they have to produce something new and different that is not generated through AI? I think it's that getting creative. And I actually think that the skills embedded in activities like that are higher level skills, right? Presentation, strong communication, synthesis. So I just think it requires us to think about what we're asking students to do and just reorient how we think about units. I think the other thing that it calls for, which is something that has been talked about a lot, but honestly hasn't gotten off the ground, is competency-based learning, right? So like now we're doing closer to like kids not just doing an assignment and you checking it off, but like how do they prove competency around a certain set of skills and initiatives? I think that teachers should be thinking about how they assess students in new and different ways, especially knowing that they can access information. Push them to go get the information from AI, Google, wherever they get it from. But then when they're in the classroom with you making sense out of it, force them to go deeper than we may have gone in the past, because we're saving so much time because they have access to so much information.
Yeah. Again, I'm very aligned in all that you're saying. I love hearing this. I wanted to dig a little deeper, maybe on the policy side. You said that obviously 40 years ago, this did start with a strong buy-in from the state at multiple levels. I think given the context and who's listening here, we're coming from different countries. We're all looking to push forward our literacy as an end goal in the short term, obviously thinking about the whole education system in the long run as well. What would be sort of key elements to consider when, one, dealing with policymakers, but two, sort of, you mentioned it before, communications, I think always thinking about the broader audience to who we're trying to convince as well the importance of this. So thinking more about the like challenges around policymaking, how do you get policymakers on board? How do you keep them on board as well? And so what are some of the lessons, do's and don'ts you might have encountered as well?
Oh God, I mean, there's so many. I would say, I know everybody has a different context, and how much, and I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, but different countries have different sets of values around education and who it's for. Different opinions about things like education for all. Do we believe every child deserves access to a high quality education, or do we think, children of a certain background deserve it? So those type of things do come up when you're thinking about policy implementation. I will say, even in our country, where we do have an education for all policy and set of values, sometimes we see that not show up in implementation, right? We may say that, but the funding doesn't follow that same model, or we don't we don't spend the extra money in places that need more in order to get to those outcomes. And so I just want to acknowledge that the conditions don't always line up with the values that school systems, elected officials, et cetera, espouse around this issue. What I have found to be more effective is when people think about it not based on like the future and the geopolitical positioning of the country. I mean, in order for your country to move into a higher position, you have to have a strong educated populace. And so talking to people about why that's important, and why that's necessary, I think is critically important as part of this work. I also think pushing for the funding to support this work is important. I think that is a difficult thing to do, and that's where communication comes in. But if you can show the data and you can show the real impact, I think you can make a stronger case for why a financial investment in education and education programming is necessary. But you really need, I believe strongly in this, you really do need a champion who has power and authority around the policy piece in order for these ideas to come to fruition. I think you can do great work and have bright spots for sure with people doing good work and, under tremendous circumstances. But I think to see it at scale and to move large tranches of students, you have to have leadership. You have to have somebody with power saying that these things matter.
Yeah, that's always a tricky role to play, right? And do you advise that role, for example, to come from civil society or a third-party organization, or would you consider it better to be within the system, politician or politics-driven?
Well, if it's too politically driven, that creates a whole bunch of issues. I think the leadership around the what, so like what are we doing, what are we prioritizing, should definitely come from within the district with education experts, et cetera. And they can work in conjunction with entities like universities or nonprofits who focus and support this work for sure. But I think the role of government is really around making sure that the funding exists for, making sure there are good systems for data and reporting that drive this work. That's really their goal and their role. And then I think if you're leading districts in these spaces, showing them the example, showing them what's possible, allows them to have more belief and allows them to, quite frankly, go and advocate for these things because they have proof points. So I think it's a collective effort. I don't think one entity owns it, outright for sure.
Yeah.
Like I started the conversation about Chicago, it really is all of these entities coming together to make things work.
Brilliant. I know I could double click on things going backward, but I think we've covered overall. Is there something else that you feel is very important to consider when you're trying to deploy these strategies at a broad scale I think most of the audience is probably civil society oriented, but I think what we want to find is obviously the bridge over with policy and academia. I think that was a very important point you brought up. What other things do you think we should be considering in this conjuncture? I think you've also made very clear, and I think I will emphasize again, the importance of transparency and accountability, platforms serving that, but also policy in place serves that. So what other things that we might have left out that you think should be emphasized again? Or
the only thing I would just double click on is making sure the education system is set up to meet the needs of the larger society, right? So like, are you producing graduates that help the local economy or industries that your country or region is known for? Are you producing the right graduates, or do you have to outsource a bunch of things because it can't be done in your country? I think when you can start to solve for those issues and can create that bridge, I think you build more collaboration with the corporations, in my opinion. And that's something that we are always striving to do here in the United States. I think there are examples where it works out really well, but then there are some examples where we don't have the connection to the careers in a way that companies value. And so figuring that out is a huge challenge.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something that we work in a lot. So you've touched on a completely different topic that I wasn't necessarily going to go into. But I think what you're saying here, and my interpretation is that actually the importance of planning backwards, right? So, where do we want to go as an end result? Not just in terms of like the academic, like literacy results, but why is literacy important? Why do we want people to be literate, right? And how does this serve like for their futures and probably your country or your city's development, right? So building a picture backwards. Would you say that was part of the process that you've lived through in different organizations, but planning for, I think, future of jobs and understanding the market, and hence what do we need growing up, right? For example, we could double click around STEM and the importance of STEM today, STEM education. Maybe if you could just give a bit of a commentary on planning backward, thinking about the future, as you just said, employment, and double clicking on the importance of STEM today.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been a big hallmark of how we have approached the work in Chicago. We have a diverse and global economy here. And so we want to make sure our students participate in that. And in some cases, a percentage of them do, but a lot of them don't. Or if they do, they're working at, pretty entry levels. And so when CPS, about a little over 25 years ago, decided we were going to have a stronger college going culture, it was to respond to that, because a lot of the industries that we have, here 50 years ago, they were manufacturing and things where you only needed a high school diploma to access. But now it's a lot of service and financial services jobs and information services jobs and healthcare. We have a lot of opportunity here, but we had to make sure we were matching the student skill set with the opportunity. And that required us to do a whole revamp on our college going culture, our expectations for graduation. So one example would be how science was administered. It used to be that you had to take 3 years of science in order to graduate, and you could take whatever sciences you wanted to. And we would have a large group of kids who would graduate without taking a lab science at all. literally get through high school without taking a lab science, which you're not focused on STEM if you allow students to do that. And so we changed that policy to say students must have, at least 2 years of a lab science. So that changed curricula, but we didn't just make that proclamation. Going back to my point earlier, we paired that with infrastructure improvements, because some principals said, we would love, Dr. Jackson, we would love to offer physics. Have you been in our physics lab? The beakers, the gas doesn't work, or we don't have tools. So going back to what I said earlier, you can't just make a big pronouncement and say, do it. You have to make sure that you have the infrastructure and the tools. And we did, because we made that change. We had to go to the schools that had science labs that were in the worst state of disrepair and improve them so that they could offer those courses in classrooms that were built to suit that curriculum.
Very much so. Just on a last thought, maybe sustainability, right? I think a lot of the things you've touched upon enable policies and changes to be sustainable. But if you had to sort of maybe highlight what are the key elements that ensure that these things continue over time and work over decades, as you started out saying, this is a long game. It's not a short game. And how do you align things so that the end goals are sustainable, and so the system in place is sustainable?
Well, I think all the things we've talked about, number one, bringing together all those entities. I think if it's something that you're doing alone, it's easy to not be sustainable. When you leave, it's over. But if you have brought corporations in, universities in, if you have brought a whole ecosystem of people from different backgrounds to work on a problem, when one leader changes or one entity is in turmoil, it doesn't go away because it's more entrenched, because a lot of people are working on it. I think policy is a big one. If you're just doing stuff and it's just programming, but it doesn't have like a strong policy framework to undergird it, it's going to go away when the leader isn't there pushing it. So the policy piece is important. And then the last thing I would say is good implementation. If you do implementation well, it will sustain. There are things, when I was leaving CPS, I was worried like, oh God, this is going to fall to the wayside. And of course, there are some things that they stopped doing or they did a different way when I left. But I'm proud to say that many of the changes that I think led to a lot of the strong outcomes, they still do. And when I hear that periodically, it makes me feel good. And I would say I did the same thing. When I was a leader, there was good stuff working. So why would I come in and change it when we already have people rallied around a strategy? We already have the systems and infrastructure to win on a strategy. I think that's something that businesses do well. Government doesn't always do well. And so if you can create those kind of systems that are built for people to win and be successful, they don't change because leadership changes.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. That I think that's a very probably the best point we can end on. I think implementation is queen of change, in my opinion, and it's often overlooked. I feel we take it for granted that just like having an idea of where we want to get to is going to get us there, and actually it comes down to the nitty-gritty, process-driven, small elements and day-to-day changes that make a difference. And I think something else that you've mentioned here, not maybe as explicitly, but is, I think in a way you're saying that the user has to be in the center, right? You're thinking about the parents, you're thinking about the teacher and the students. So making sure that the system is aligned for them and not for others, I think sounds important. I don't know if you have any specific examples around that, but if you did around sort of the user design or user sort of experience that you're sort of highlighting.
I don't have anything else that I would add specifically. If there's a specific example or something that I mentioned, I'm happy to go in depth. But I just think some of the principles I talked about earlier, technology, better implementation, I think all those things are what we thought about. And like you said, communicating it so that people knew the why. If I think about every initiative we led, all of those things were a part of it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. So if you don't have any other comments, I have no other questions. So I don't know if you want to say anything else to end on.
Oh, no. Thank you for having me here. It's a great discussion, and I look forward to, continuing to follow the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you very much, Janice. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I loved getting to know all your work and all the trajectory. I think it's so valuable, especially given
Thank you.
your experience as a user, as an implementer, as a doer, as everything. And so the whole package is here. So thank you. And I'm sure there was, I took many notes, great lessons for all of us here doing things in Latin America. It was lovely to meet you.
Right.
Thank you to all our listeners.
All right. I'll be. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, perhaps in some places still. Thank you very much for joining us today. This conversation takes place in the context of the Movement for Reading Comprehension in Latin America, a growing coalition of civil society organizations, policymakers, and partners working together to improve foundational learning across the region. And today we are delighted to welcome Ben Piper. Ben is the director of the Global Education Program at the Gates Foundation, where he leads the foundation's strategy to improve foundational learning at scale across low and middle income countries. Ben, thank you very much for being with us today. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Buenos tardes, and thank you, Ignacio and team, for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a real honor.
Thank you very much. So we are hoping for an open and reflective conversation focused less on theory and more on what actually works when education systems attempt to improve learning outcomes for millions of children, a small task that we have in hand. And yes, with that in mind, let me start, Ben, with a big picture question. And this would be, we all know that in a world with vast needs and unlimited resources, prioritization is essential. So why is foundational learning strategic for national development? And why should governments place it at the very top of their policies agendas?
Thank you so much for that question. And it's true, particularly in the parts of the world where I work, the funding environment has changed dramatically. And so this issue of prioritization is even more important. But I think some of the answer goes to the name. We're talking about foundational learning. And foundational learning it should be a priority because it's the starting point. It's the base. Everything else builds on the ability of children to have these basic literacy and numeracy skills. So I have been working in education my entire career, and I know that the education systems in Latin America and Caribbean have so many challenges. But Ignacio, team, this is one problem we know how to fix. Ignacio and I were struggling to get the internet to work to make this call happen. We don't know how to fix the internet. But this issue of teaching these wonderful, talented children in the LAC region how to read, that one we know how to do. There is so much evidence. There is so much evidence on cost effectiveness. There's so much evidence about how to do it at scale, about how to work with the system at the decentralized levels. It doesn't mean it's easy, Ignacio, but it does mean that this one is solvable. So I just had another partner of ours share some results from a new literacy program in another region, yet another program that has impacts. So this is a solvable problem, number one. Number two, improving literacy outcomes is critical to unleash human capital that's needed to power economic growth. If you want to think about, I'm thinking maybe of a minister in LAC that is struggling with, how do I grow my economy? We have worries about STEM. We don't have enough progress on TVET. Over and over again, the evidence shows that one of the best pathways to STEM are literacy and numeracy skills. I was just in Senegal last week. We were talking about how numeracy is the first step to STEM, and you can't have children doing well in numeracy if they can't read the math problem. So it's the pathway to STEM. It's the pathway to technical and vocational skills. There's actually a very good paper by a partner, Kirsty Newman, who shows that if you're worried about TVET, technical vocational training, it actually starts with foundational learning and literacy. If you look at the gains in learning outcomes, if you have one standard deviation better learning outcomes, which is a big task, but it's very possible, you can have a 5% reduction in youth unemployment. There was a longitudinal study, Ignacio, very recently, both from Pakistan as well as from Indonesia, that shows that children who have these basic literacy skills have 11% or 12% more economic growth as adults. So the benefits are strong. And last thing I'd say is that it's also the great equalizer. I know so many countries in LAC are worried about, economic inequality. And what you basically have is a bifurcated, differentiated system in so many countries where the rich do well, not because of their talent or because of their hard work, but because of where they grew up, what school they went to. I was a benefit in my own school in the United States. I went to a good school. It was a very unequal school. But my mother was doing her PhD, Ignacio, on teaching children how to read. And her dissertation was videotaping 2 children to learn to read when they were 2 and 3 years old. So I went to a very unequal school, but my mother, because of her dissertation, taught me how to read when I was 2 and 3 years old. So I went to a school that had blacks and whites together, but the very best reading level. Even in my grade 1 classroom, I have a picture of this grade 1 classroom, which was black and white. And I was the only black child in my top reading level, not because I'm talented, not because I'm hardworking, but because my mother taught me to read 3 years before I got to school. So if we want to have equality at the societal level, it starts off with equality at the basic skills. The pathway to catch up is much more difficult if these children don't have the basic skills in even grade 1. And I think particularly in so many countries in LAC that are learning Spanish, which is a relatively transparent language, it is possible to make a lot of gains even in grade 1. So I could go on and on. There are many reasons, but I think that's very clear that foundational learning should be strategic for national development. And I think it has impacts on economic growth, has impacts on the rest of the education sector, and even has impacts, last thing I'll say, on maternal and child health. The stat I love is that women with reading skills are 71% more likely to access care during pregnancy. I care about the girl herself, but even if you only care about the child that she's going to have, that child she's going to have is 71% more likely to have care during pregnancy. So many benefits to these basic skills.
Thank you very much, Ben. This explanation helps us a lot to frame the importance of the issue, and thank you also for that bit of your personal story, because it seems like your own mother's vocation helps to understand yours. So thank you.
That's right.
Also for
and I should say it goes one generation down. My oldest daughter is starting her first year of teaching in the US, and actually she's using the kind of science of reading methods as a special ed teacher, predominantly actually with children who speak Spanish at home. So it's a family business, but she's surpassing her father.
That's great. That's great. And there the Spanish connects us also. So let's now. I propose that we now move on from the why to the how, to speak a little bit about the evidence on what works in terms of foundational learning. And in this direction, my question would be, what can you tell us about what global evidence tell us about the conditions under which early literacy policies work at scale? And here we have a particular interest on what should governments do, right, to achieve serious transformation at scale.
No, I think this issue of how do governments make the policy choices they need to improve outcomes at scale is the kind of fundamental question of the education space right now. And I think fortunately we do have such a growing evidence base about what works to cost effectively improve outcomes. Now, Ignacio, you didn't say cost, but if I'm thinking about a government, I'm thinking about a country that is facing some economic crisis, or even just prioritization, as your last question said, you need to know that it's cost effective. And it's possible to do this within the context of existing government budgets. So I think there is quite a bit of evidence in 3 areas. There are 3 proven interventions that can scale, that have scaled through government systems. So the first one is something called structured pedagogy, which you can talk about, which is basically a set of materials for kids training for teachers, lesson plans for teachers, and coaching and system support for teachers. That's one, structured pedagogy, which has a lot of evidence, cost-effective evidence. There's also something called targeted instruction, sometimes teaching at the right level. It has different names, but basically organizing the literacy class so that you have the children like Ben, who need to practice their letters or letter sounds in one group. And they have children like Ignacio, who actually knows their letter sounds and knows how to use syllables and can read simple stories in another group. So you're targeting the instruction at our level. And then third, increasingly, we have evidence about how EdTech and AI can help particular challenges that schools and programs are facing. And I think actually the evidence based on EdTech and AI and literacy is actually strongest in LAC of all the regions in the world, including the US and Europe. I think there's more evidence recently and for the use of AI and EdTech from the Latin America, Caribbean area. So the system's ability to use a structured pedagogy or target instruction or AI program really depends on, number one, choosing the right type of method, and number two, having the system infrastructure in place to receive that method and make sure it works. I'm thinking about the first one, structured pedagogy. So basically, what does that mean? I was in a country last week that is implementing a structured pedagogy program. What does it look like? If I was to go to one of the countries on the call, it looks like a child with a book that looks exciting. It has colorful pages. It has stories at the right level. It has pictures that look like their home, like their village, but also is working at different levels of instruction. So in one page, you might have letter level, you might have syllable level, you might have word level, and you might have story level. That's what a page could look like. Some countries that have workbooks actually have places for the child to write a story or write some blending or segmenting activities. The teacher would have a set of materials, teacher's guide or lesson plan. And I think it's worth noting this. My views on this have really changed, Ignacio, and I'm not sure where people in the call feel. I was trained, my first job actually was a fourth grade teacher. So this is in my blood. And I had the advantage of being a fourth grade teacher trained by a professor who was actually well known in the reading space. She developed a program called the 4 Blocks program, which was a literacy intervention in the US. And I was one of her few students, and she was, worldwide US famous researcher. And so I was really well trained. I knew how to do the various activities, the blending, the segmenting, the comprehension activity, the writing activities. I learned it all. I went to my first class, Ignacio, 4th grade. I had, a wide range of skill levels, some kids who did very well. And then I had some children for whom English was a second language and some who were just struggling. I actually picked the school by the poverty level. It was the poorest school in the district. So I was well trained, and I was actually teaching in my first year the program that my professor developed, right? So I was lucky to pick a school that her program had been adopted. But I also was coming at it from a point of view philosophically that teachers should be the magician, that teacher is the only one who knows their students, knows the curriculum, and knows assessment, and that I should not be given a lesson plan. I'm the one who should be developing the lesson plan. And I promise you, Ignacio, within 4 months of teaching this classroom, pretty small scale, pretty small classroom by the context of countries I work in, it was only 26 children. I was asking desperately for, give me a lesson plan, give me some instructional materials that I could teach from, because it was hard. Now, I'm a good teacher, so I'm not reading it word for word. I'm using it as a guide to develop my lesson routines and give a good lesson. So that sort of approach, I had so many advantages. I was well trained. I was teaching a program that I knew, but I still benefited from having a structured lesson plan that would connect to what was in the student page. So my lesson plan would show me how to do the phonemic awareness lesson, the routine. It would show me how to do the syllable routine, would show me how to do the fluency routine, and critically would give me a lot of fun reading comprehension activities. that would make that classroom instruction exciting, but also it was systematic. So I had some lessons where I was doing retelling, some where they were doing prediction, some they were doing a mind map. The stories were vibrant. I had some that were read alouds, so that we could talk with the metacognitive processes. What do you think is going to happen next? Oh, was that what you expected? As I'm reading this, I'm thinking about my own brain. Do I understand that word? If I don't understand the word, I read it again. So it's a phonics-based program where there was enough time at the letter level, but it was a fun and engaging lesson. And that sort of approach is what I saw last week in Senegal. This teacher who didn't have the advantages I had. She wasn't trained by a world famous professor. She didn't have, she wasn't teaching a program that her professor developed, but she did have enough support so that the instructional methods were effective. So this sort of structured pedagogy program, lesson plan, student book or textbook, also needs coaching and support to that teacher. I didn't have a good example of this when I was a first-year teacher, so I was only observed once for 5 minutes in the US for my first year of teaching, but I think the good programs have kind of consistent follow-up. The teacher, Ben, needs to have Ignacio, who is an experienced teacher, watch me do my lesson, give me feedback on how my fluency activities should be more effective. I need to have kind of skills-based training where I see that lesson routine, that phonics blending activity. I see someone doing it in a very engaging, fast-moving, exciting thing where each child has an opportunity. So at a system level, well-meaning teachers, and by the way, I feel strongly that teachers are the countries who are listening to this. You can improve learning with the teachers you have in your classrooms. There might be other things you want to do to change the status of the teaching profession, but I think the evidence is pretty clear that using existing teachers and their existing skill level with enough support, they can improve learning. So we had this conversation in the country last week where they were talking about how to change the teaching profession and increase the training level. I'm not against that, but I think there are program after program that even at scale, you can improve outcomes with the existing teachers, but they need support. They need structure. They need building around it. So yeah, that's kind of the type of program that you might use, Ignacio. But then there's also a little bit more evidence, and I'm not sure if you want to get into this now, but I could walk you through what this new recent paper says about literacy. Would this be a good time to do that?
Yes, sure. And in fact, Ben, I help you. I thank you so much for sharing these insights, because here in Latin America, also as in other parts of the world, this is a very difficult issue, and there are very strong opinions. So these insights come at a very good time.
Well, listen, I have strong opinions, but I've changed my mind twice based on evidence. And I think that's the question that all of us who are researchers need to do, is to be open to the evidence. And I think what we have now is kind of a much greater progress on what we know. So just to tell you about this new paper, the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, which is a panel of well-known researchers from across the world. There's economists, there's educationists, there's policymakers. There's a wide range of researchers on the panel, and we're supported by some excellent researchers. So we have been doing these kind of cost effectiveness analyses of kind of what the best buys are for education. And that's been the main purpose of the panel. But just last week, 2 weeks ago, we launched a new and special paper on literacy. The basic idea was, I'm from the US, but I was working in Africa predominantly. And there was some pushback, Ignacio, on kind of, we're doing these literacy programs, but all the articles you are citing are from the rich world. They're from America, from the UK. So how do I know that we're using the right evidence that applies to my language? Particularly if you think about English compared to Spanish, English is not a transparent language. The letter sounds are not consistent. So if you're developing research on a lot of things that are English specific, maybe it doesn't apply in Spanish. I'm not a Spanish expert by any means, but I do know that there's a parallel in Africa and India where you have a lot of languages, a lot of countries that were doing these literacy programs, and there was questions. Are we depending too much on the National Reading Panel evidence from the US or the Rose Report from the UK, which were often cited? So what have we done in this paper? We have taken evidence from 160 new studies, which cover 170 plus languages. Okay, so there's dozens of new papers included in the new literacy paper from Latin America, and there are, as I said, 160 new papers. So what do we find? This first sentence is hard for me to say. We find that the failure to use evidence-based approaches to instruction is one of the main reasons that the literacy crisis is as bad as it is. That there have been countries and partners who have implemented literacy programs, but have not followed what the literacy evidence says. So this is a solvable problem because it's just a decision. It's a policy choice. Are we going to follow what the evidence says or not? So one of the big questions we were faced as we started the analysis on this paper was, how much does the global idea of science of reading, how much does it change when we incorporate all of these new papers? As I said, 160 plus new papers. Does it change it completely? Do we have something that's specific for low and middle income countries that is different from rich countries? And in short, what we find is that the evidence has adapted slightly. Instead of 5 key areas of literacy, now we're suggesting 6. But there is now an update to the science of reading, which I think many of the readers or listeners to this presentation, podcast, interview might find interesting. We find that the most effective literacy programs should be explicit and systematic and should include 6 skills. And I'll let the listeners guess which is the new one. The first skill is oral language. It just makes sense that children need to be able to understand the words and vocabulary of the language that they're trying to read. Second, that there is importance on phonological awareness, that the idea that words have sounds and that those sounds can be manipulated. The third is phonics instruction. So one of the headline points in the paper is that evidence-based instruction that follows the science of reading does include phonics. There are 6 areas, so it's not only phonics. So it's 2 points in one. Phonics is critical, but it's not the only thing. And in fact, the best evidence, the best programs have all 6 of these elements. But kids do, including in Spanish, they do need time at the phonics level, being able to think about the relationships between letters and sounds, putting those letters and sounds together in syllables, and be able to decode words. Fourth is fluency. Kids need time reading. We want that reading to be fun, engaging, that we get lost in stories. I'm a teacher, but I'm also a father, and the joy of seeing my children excited about a story with people who look like them, who are interested in the same things. There's power in that. So we want kids to be able to have access to reading materials that provide sufficient time for practice. Kids need to practice reading. They need to struggle at the kind of developmentally appropriate levels. I believe in a lot of the programs have something called controlled text, so that particularly in grade 1, the kids have access to success in decoding and practicing fluency. The 5th area is comprehension. I said earlier that children need practice and training on how to comprehend. So what are the things that your brain does as you're reading? What are the metacognitive practices? As I said, the prediction activities, the retelling, the mind maps. There's lots of things that countries should do to have time on reading comprehension. And finally, writing. That there is a lot of time that's needed to learn spelling, to learn writing, to learn creative writing, and then there's a reciprocal relationship between the ability to write and spell and being able to read and decode. So that's what the paper says with respect to the what. 6 areas, and we need teachers having support. Now, listeners on the call can think about your country. Where are your strengths, and where are the areas of weakness and growth? But I think it's worth taking seriously the findings of the paper and thinking about the fact that, I heard this from some colleagues from Brazil. We actually had a joint visit with several of our partners to see what happened in Brazil, where Sobral and the state of Ceará had really substantial improvements in literacy. some of the best evidence anywhere in the world. So we actually just had a meeting in South Africa where with some partners from India, from South Africa, from Kenya, met together with some of the leaders in Brazil to learn what happened. And one of the things I found really compelling in that was this idea that you're only 7 once. This is from the Brazilians. You're only 7 once, and being able to like have the year 7 where not only do you have these basic skills, but you get the joy of reading. You get the joy of experiencing enough time with text in your language or a language that you can decode. And so how do we think about getting this evidence of these 6 areas in the literacy paper to this idea from Brazil that you're only 7 once? I think the paper also says that children learn to read best when the instruction is explicit, so that teachers are explaining or modeling the skill before the students are practicing, that is systematic. I want these materials, and the best ones I've seen, they're beautiful, right? They have great illustrations, they're attractive, but underpinning it is a big spreadsheet. It's a very scientific structure that is thinking about the brain, not of my child, maybe not of your child, maybe not of me as when I was 7, but of that 7-year-old in the village who didn't have access to materials and doesn't have a wealthy family, but does have the ability to learn to read in a couple of years. So if we have this systematic approach, it makes it easier for that child with less oral language skills and less access to print. And then comprehensive. We need to make sure that all of these core skills are covered. And since any of them, if you skip them, it would hinder reading. So being able to have these kind of approaches driven by government. I'm actually a co-author of this paper with Jaime Saavedra from Peru, who works in the World Bank now. And he showed in his time in the bank what it means to have kind of a government leader who took seriously the task of improving literacy. And I'm sure there are many leaders on this call, listen to this podcast, who can have that kind of decision-making power. I was in the country last week. It was so inspiring. This minister had just lost his mother, and he was on leave. And he wanted to have a meeting with me, even coming from leave, even just having lost his mother, because he was so committed to this task of making sure that all of the children in his country have the abilities of literacy. So yes, making time for one meeting is one thing, but making time to have this whole system work together to apply these proven cost-effective models like structured pedagogy and targeted instruction, including AI, can just make such a difference. And we've seen country after country recently that applying what this paper says, the paper is driven from countries. So there's many countries actually who are doing what's in the paper before the paper was written, because the paper is drawing from their experience. But anyway, we're just, as the Gates Foundation, just inspired by what so many countries have started to do. And hopefully as the paper and as this discussion and your movement for reading comprehension makes progress, that these leaders can really buy in and capitalize on what the evidence does say.
Thank you very much, Ben. This is so interesting. And in fact, Jaime also participated from this meeting a couple of days ago, last week. And also Bebeu Arruda, who was one of the majors of Sobrala and one of the leaders of this reform in Brazil. So perhaps I would like to stay speaking with you forever and have so many questions, but time is limited. So perhaps one final question that I have for you is, you have showed us some insights about what the latest research shows, and you have extensive experience working with governments in Africa and also through the Gates Foundation. A lot of exposure to what's happening in different parts of the world. So perhaps my question would be, and now connecting right to this reading comprehension movement in Latin America, what would your suggestion for us would be? What have you find that governments are doing lately that is working? What lessons do you draw from large-scale reforms that you have been very close to in Africa? Perhaps the question is, what would you recommend as a next step for our movement here in Latin America?
Well, yeah, I'll give you some examples from Africa, but I guess the number one best example that's very current is in India. The Prime Minister wrote a new education policy a few years ago, and he made clear that foundational learning is such a priority that it's nothing else in the policy, none of the other priorities will work unless foundational learning is fixed. So that's one of the statements in the national education policy, that this is kind of necessary for all the other priorities in the system. And India has made a real concerted effort to invest domestic resources in the materials and the training that teachers need, and the materials that kids will learn from. And several states have made pretty substantial missions to improve learning. I was just recently in India, and with a few other partners at the global level, we were able to observe what it looks like in India in a state called Uttar Pradesh. Now, Uttar Pradesh, Ignacio, is a state of 230 million people. I'm not sure where that ranks in the size of Latin American and Caribbean countries, but in the countries I know, 230 million people in a state is not a state. It's a huge country. I think it's number 5 or number 6 in the world if it was a country. And that state is a relatively poor state compared to the rest of India, but they invested in just the same package. Workbooks for every child that was designed following the science of reading, teacher's guide for the teacher following this kind of structured approach, coaching for the teacher, training for the teacher. The package is not different. But what they had in addition was the political will, government-led reform, political will. If you go to I see behind you a very beautiful painting. If you go to the district office in Uttar Pradesh in India, you wouldn't see a nice painting. You would see targets. What should it look like in grade 2? What's the fluency level and the letter knowledge level and the comprehension level that we need for grade 2 and grade 3? That's behind that district officer in India, because it's not just on the wall. It's something that people know. People took as their own task, having all of the kids in my district, all of the kids in my school, all of the kids in my classroom hitting these benchmarks and providing them the support they need. It makes it all the way down from the teacher, who I know, I'm a big fan of teachers with support. They're willing to do it. They just need to see that it will work. That mid-level civil servant in that district office who's busy, but gets to the school and provides that instructional support. So India is a great example of what it takes to have this kind of full-fledged system of support that can improve outcomes. And the simple story is, when they did their most recent data collection at the state level, we found in this particular state that the percentage of kids who are hitting the benchmark for literacy more than doubled since before COVID. They were worried that maybe we'd be declining and hopefully we'll be a little bit not so bad. It more than doubled the percentage of kids who are there. Now, it's not good enough. I think when you talk to the leaders in India, they're not satisfied because there's still many kids who don't have these basic skills, but it is possible at large scale. We're seeing something similar in Zambia. We have a national level reform. I was just in Senegal, meeting with the minister and their team on this bilingual program. So it's the political will is the main point I want to say. And then also making some policy choices. So in Senegal, they're making a real push on bilingual programs. So it's both local language as well as French, making sure the kids have the skills. So there could be one of the things that the policy paper on literacy makes clear is that there's advantages of learning to read in your first language. So that's one policy choice you could make. A second policy choice would be this kind of question of phonics, and teachers develop teacher lesson plans. That's not popular in some countries, but being able to invest in that policy choice, I think, is paying off real dividends for many countries that have made it. And I'm thinking right now, again, of Senegal. It used to be a country that really believed in this kind of idea of, teacher from a philosophical point of view being the only one who can design the materials, but having this kind of lesson plan in their hand makes it much easier for them to do the hard task of government. The last one, again, I gave you an example from India. Now let me just actually go to my home country of the US. Not a country that's currently known for, policy agreement on a few things, but this one is different. over the last couple of years has been a really substantial shift in implementation of science of reading-backed literacy programs. Despite some of the political turmoil, we've seen real progress on states, both on the left and states on the right, who are saying, okay, the evidence is strong. Science of reading tells us we need to have some phonics-based, not phonics only, but phonics-based instructional programs. So let's apply. So that the movement actually started in countries that are a little bit poorer, a little bit more right-wing, actually. And I think now we're seeing progress in some of the left-wing states to implement science of reading programs. So it's actually an exciting example of non-politically aligned, evidence-based programs that will improve learning outcomes. So in Africa, we're seeing this in South Africa, real progress in many provinces in South Africa applying evidence-based programs. We're seeing it in West Africa. We're seeing it in South Asia. So we're so excited to be able to share this paper, and I know there's just so many great examples. When I read the evidence, so much of it comes from Latin America and the Caribbean on how to improve foundational learning and literacy programs at scale, and I just think there are great examples. Africa and India are learning from Brazil. I'm sure there's many other countries in the region that are ready to surpass what Brazil has done on applying the best programs. So that combination of political will combined with evidence-based programs and really focusing on implementation fidelity. Let me be that last point I make, is that these programs that have the biggest impact, yes, they've made maybe a policy shift and they've made the hard choice on something that might be not easy to do, but they also have a system of implementation support so that you know in District A, B, and C who is implementing where the challenges are, and providing support to the teachers who are struggling. New interventions take time to get implemented, and so knowing where the things are going well and where they're not is one of the things that differentiates highly effective programs, that they do know implementation quality, and they are able to apply some of what we're learning from AI to solve challenges that teachers are facing, whether it comes from lesson preparation or assessment. There are particular things that we're seeing over and over again that AI is able to help solve. So I think, again, lots of evidence that we look forward to learning from what's happening in your region.
Thank you, Ben. And it's so interesting that this final reflection has to do with political will, because it's in fact one of the main goals that we pursue at this reading comprehension movement in the region. And in fact, we are starting to have good examples about how civic society is working with governments to secure that political will. For instance,
Yes.
in Argentina, yes, a couple of years ago, during the election year, we managed to get a commitment from all the presidential candidates to prioritize reading comprehension, and most of the governors did the same. It was a huge success for us. And also, just some weeks ago in Chile, our neighbor country, the main presidential candidates there also did a very similar commitment.
Excellent.
That it's really encouraging, and you already spoke about Brazil, that also has an official, very robust official program. So, we are happy to see that political will is an important part of the puzzle, and this encourages us to keep working on this direction. So thank you.
I mean,
also about that.
All I know is that one of the toughest jobs in the world would be a minister or an education leader in a country. But if I was a minister or education leader, this would be the thing I picked as my kind of signature program, because it will work. It's unlike other things where you're kind of guessing, I'm not sure. So it's a logical thing to put your energy behind. Again, going to the kind of Sobral, Sierra, Brazil idea, like having elections after elections won by the leaders who are showing that I can deliver on education quality. There's few things that you can be as confident in as foundational learning. It doesn't make it easy. I mean, having led a couple of these programs myself, it doesn't mean that you're not working very hard, but it does mean with that kind of energy behind it and expectation, it's possible. The reason why is because the kids are capable. It's us as policymakers and civil society who haven't done enough to make it possible for that 7-year-old who's only in class as a 7-year-old once to benefit the most from that 7-year-old instruction. It's up to us as policymakers, it's up to us as philanthropy to make it as easy as possible, and to get, more importantly, to get behind governments and leaders who are taking the task seriously. We actually have a new investment with other philanthropies in Africa, which is, let's stop picking countries as philanthropy. Let's just follow the countries that are prioritizing evidence-based programs. So there's a new investment that we and some philanthropies are doing. Let's flip it. We're looking for countries who are prioritizing, who are putting their political will, who are investing domestic resources, and maybe our small amounts. Governments pay the most amount of money. Our small amounts can just make it a little bit easier for those governments who want to prioritize. And I'm much more confident in that sort of approach than the kind of approach where the funders are doing the most work, because it's fundamentally the governments, it's fundamentally the existing teacher, it's fundamentally the leaders in Chile and Argentina and Brazil, like you said, who are making those tough choices. I'm really excited to hear that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This has been a very rich and thoughtful conversation. You have helped us to connect global evidence, system-level implementation, and practical lessons in a way that is highly relevant for our region. So thank you so much for this. And these insights that you have shared are extremely valuable for everyone working to make foundational learning a true priority across education systems in Latin America. So thank you so much for your time, your leadership, and for sharing your experience so generously with us today. Thank you, Ben.
Muchas gracias, and congratulations to you and the team. We look forward to having better stories and more stories from Latin America and Caribbean about what's possible. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Ben. Thank you.